nothing has made kind of my face, get that stereotypical Fast and Furious warp speed. And I remember getting out of this car and going, this is perfect. I would say the cars that really stand out in my mind that were done by especially individuals, I think I'll start with that, is these kids from Merritt Island, Florida. So I was in Florida doing a filming trip and I get an email and it says, hey, we're near Cape Canaveral where Kennedy Space Center is. We have these really neat cars. I think you'll really enjoy them. And you get that all the time. I was like, you know what? I'm 2.5 hours away. Why not? So I drive out there and up comes a Ford Escort with 440 wheel horsepower. Little did I remember that Mazda and Ford were together a long time. And it was the 1.8 Miata engine just this way. And it was front wheel drive. He'd built it, made it happen. That car runs like, I think a 10 or a 9 now, or something crazy. But he goes, can my friends come? I go, absolutely. After you see this, there's good stuff. Then a guy named Jason shows up. It's a Nissan Titan supercharged swap S13 coupe, full-blown drift car, but he was out of drift spares, so he showed up on a slick and skinny setup for me to drive on. Then his girlfriend showed up, which had a 700 horsepower KAT S13 240SX, which ran 9s through a manual 300ZX gearbox. And then a kid named Timmy, who I love to death, and basically the same engine setup as that 9-second one, but in a ratty, beat-up 240SX. Like, you could just do whatever you want, don't care about it. Hers was pretty, his was rowdy and dumb. The KA is known as, like, you swap that, right? You just don't really do anything with it. They had figured out how to master this platform, and Timmy challenged me to break it. And in the video, no mercy. Like, red line and holding it. Every single gear. Saw that, drove the 9-second one, stock body line, 240SX, like bone stock on slicks and skinnies. It was gorgeous. Interior was perfect. Stock seats, nothing crazy. 300ZX gearbox, Nissan gearbox. It felt familiar. Got into the Titan one. That was crazy and wild because no hood, big silver blower here. And then, of course, the Escort. Escort was gutted and ratty and crazy and kind of scary, because you could hear everything. There's no carpet, no anything. It's just a shifter right here. There's no dash really, it's just shifter. Those, I would say, made such an impression on me that day because then they'd be like, hey, we have this other friend who's really smart. And I drove this turbocharged 5-cylinder Volvo wagon that day. These kids who were so talented and they just made everything work they found. I think that is when you're doing it right. And all of them were saying like, yeah, these have been running for years. They had figured it out. They had gone through trials and tribulations. And are there cooler cars out there? Of course. But when it came to seeing project cars that were just like, these are stout. These are going to work. I was extraordinarily impressed. Same goes to like VMP Performance down in New Smyrna Beach near Daytona. They had this one S550 Mustang called Track Attack. And they put a 2020 Predator GT500 motor in an older S550 and gave it a manual gearbox. So it's basically a manual new GT500. Drove it, made 1,000 horsepower. And it was awesome, right? Revved to almost 9,000 RPM, did everything it needed to, came back. And, the interior was done. It was a SEMA car. It was part of the $1 program, right? So they could get the car for $1 and show it at SEMA. And they built the whole thing for Ford's booth. It was not just a display car. It did it, right? That's what makes it really special when you drive something that talks the talk, but then also walks the walk. I would say when it comes to like the smaller stuff, those are the ones that kind of really stick out. There's a million more. Obviously, that Racing Channel's Toyota Supra from 2015, that car was crazy. It made 1,000 wheel and it was perfect. Like you got on it, it went dead straight every single time. He also had a 2JZ swapped S14, which is way more common now, but it wasn't back then. That car with a full interior in it, built by Real Street Performance, went 790s with no cage in it. 790s. And what he did was he used the factory Toyota auto transmission and built it. Instead of like a Power Glide or something crazy, he was like, yeah, it works. Built that, did it, and ran 8.7 at 158 his first go. Full interior, AC, everything. Those are the cars that really make a statement, where somebody took maybe years of their life to make sure they had the right door panel, to make sure they had the right center console. Like, you think that doesn't matter that much when it comes to driving experience, but it's almost a subconscious thing to be like, this thing's put together, right? It's fun to drive gutted, crazy, stupid things, but it's one thing to have something that's crazy fast and it feels like it's not going to kill you. So that's always a good feeling. The twin turbo Lambo stuff's a great example. Like, those feel factory, which is really abnormal. Dallas Performance, for example, was fortunate to drive a bunch of their stuff. I drove AMS's R8 that Kyle Loftus from 1320 had. That car felt like $1 million. It felt like it could come off the factory showroom floor until you got into boost, right? You're driving it around, it's normal, it's an R8. And the R8 has a very subtle presence when you just drive it around, right? It feels, you can sense the Lamborghini, but it's not like a Lamborghini, right? You're just kind of like having a nice time. You have space, it's nice. And then you get on it and you're like, holy smokes. Like, it made 1,300 wheel, I think. Boost Logic GTR. That car, I think, out of all of them, was the first like high horsepower car I'd driven. And I was like, this is perfect. It had a cage in the back, but it was barely noticeable. It made 1,400 wheel. It had bead locks all the way around. So from a 20 roll with 1,400 horsepower with dead hook, and nothing has made kind of my face, get that stereotypical Fast and Furious warp speed. And I remember getting out of this car and going, this is perfect. Like, if you wanted something just stupid, stupid fast, it didn't feel dangerous, which is saying something, but it just was so bananas fast, and it never rattled. It never had anything that seemed wrong. And you open the hood and it's factory turbo location. It's not one of those things where they have the big turbos up in the front grille or anything like that, which is necessary for the record-breaking stuff. But when it came to a street car, Sean, who owned the car, literally did everything he could do in that car and sold it. He won his class in TX2K, I believe. He did the half mile and did 213 miles an hour. He'd done it all. And he was like, okay, cool. Then sold it. But that just almost shows how good the car was if he's not fixing it all the time and has to worry about it. If he ever wanted to drive it, just turn it on and go drive it. But you're paying how much money to make that happen? But I think after driving literally over 1,000 cars, which is crazy to think about over, let's say, 10 to 12 years, and filming them and getting to know people, cars have always been about the people. Like, at the end of the day, it's cool to meet people who are into the same thing as you. And I think for me, I had a harder time making good friends in like high school and college. But once I got into car stuff, it was easy because you're already done. You found the hobby you have in common. And every owner was so proud of their car, or jokingly not proud of their car, and be like, hey man, like, has a check engine light or whatever. But it almost made it funny. Right? It's like, hey, look, I know it's not perfect, but you're still going to have a good time. And I think the biggest takeaway is whether it's a 40-wheel horsepower Volkswagen Beetle all the way to a 1,400 horsepower GTR, cars all have a story. If it's not bone stock, it has a story. Whether it meant them driving 9 hours for the video, all the way to breaking records on a drag strip. I think it's really phenomenal to see that. You have one of my friends named Zach. He's the best example of this. One of my friends, Zach Borden. He has a Lincoln Town Car. It was his granddad's car, and now it was his first car, and now he modifies this car. He raced it at oval racing. He made it a manual transmission. He cammed the 2-valve V8 in it. That was basically a glorified Crown Vic motor. Pulled that, LS swapped it, now has another manual gearbox in it, and it's slammed to the ground. He's turboing it right now. And people can relate to that because it's attainable. He had this car, it was a hand-me-down, and it has a better story than almost anything. And I think every time I upload that car, it does well. And I don't think that's a coincidence. If you can make something work and have a story behind it and make it look nice, that's usually all you need. At the end of the day, it's the first impression when people see the car and they go, wow, I like his wrap, or I like his paint. I like his bumper. I like his interior. That's what really gives a first impression. The driving is the bonus part a lot of the times for when people show off their stuff. But when you have that full package deal, it's hard to beat.
We'd like to thank this month's sponsor of the VINwiki YouTube channel, Minta Watches. We know the world of great cars and great watches tends to overlap a lot, and Minta specializes in remarkable timepieces, both vintage and modern, because they know that great watches also have great stories. So if you're looking for some entertaining and educational watch content, be sure to check out Adam's YouTube channel. And if you're in the market for a watch or you just want to learn more about watches, be sure to reach them at the link in the description below. They'll take great care of you.